You are well aware of the magnitude 7.8 earthquake that's hit Turkey and Syria, killing thousands, and injuring many, many more. An organisation that's on the ground helping right now is Tearfund. It's a Christian non-profit organisation passionate about ending poverty and living out God's kingdom values of love, hope and transformation. We're really blessed this morning to have the CEO of Tearfund NZ, Ian McInnes, in studio. Good morning, Ian.
Yeah, good morning, kia ora. Thanks for having me.
Oh, pleasure, Ian. I'm sure it's been a very busy last few days for you. Can you give us a bit of an insight into what's happening on the ground at the moment over there, and what's those first 4 days or so been looking like for the people in these areas affected?
Yeah, well, we're in touch with partners, and we're of course watching the same news that everyone else is, and I'm shocked at just the scale of this. That main city in Turkey had 2 million people in it, and certainly by the aerial views that I can see, about 1 and 2 apartment blocks are down, and we're talking tens of thousands of buildings crushed, and so I'm really quite shocked at the scale of it. And then over on the Syrian side, it's been very hard to access Syria for some time now. Particularly that northeast corner has all sorts of different groups operating, and the government of Syria is not fully in control of that. And so that's a very hard environment to deliver aid into. And so the only footage coming out of there is off people's handheld phones, even to the likes of the BBC and to Al Jazeera. So we're getting our stories from some places like everybody else off the media, but there is just a vast amount of destruction. And I think for a long time, for a while there, the death toll stood still, and that's because they were prioritising the living, and now they're starting to count the dead.
You're talking about it's hard areas to get to. Roads are shut, airports shut. Now they're having to deal with the extreme weather conditions. So,
well, I think that's the difference between, say, 10 years ago, I responded to an earthquake in Haiti, and actually the temperatures are reasonably civil, and you could live on the street or sleep under a tent. It's presently between -4, and +10 in Turkey and Syria, and you can't survive long out in that. And so getting tents erected, getting blankets and basic bedding in people's hands is just the starter. And then there's the food, water, the sanitation issues, pregnant mothers. I mean, it's nuts. And so it really is an incredibly challenging environment to take care of people, and the aid community, in both cases, the government's responding as quickly as they can, but there's all sorts of criticism now about the speed of that response. I'm afraid that is always the case. They are simply overwhelmed.
Where do people even begin to go? Because, all these buildings collapsed, and then you've got aftershocks and stuff coming. I mean, I imagine most people wouldn't feel safe even going back into any of the buildings that are half standing or fully standing. So, I mean, what happens?
Well, I have a bit of a visceral response to this because I can remember it only too well. You step inside a cement building, and I did this in Haiti, and the aftershocks come. You start planning your exit as quickly as you can, because all the buildings are compromised. There's something like, British engineers estimate there's something like 13 million buildings in Turkey that have been signed off without the required paperwork because they don't actually meet the compliance standards. That's a whole other story. Basically, you've got the entire apartment block stock of Turkey is not really up to a 7.8 earthquake. And although that's a very big earthquake, it should have been able to survive it. If we put that on Wellington, for example, most modern buildings would survive that. They'd be damaged, but they'd still be standing. And so people are petrified, rightly so, to go back into those apartments. So now they're in the town square, or now they're out under canvas, and that's really the only safe place to be. But that is, of course, very hard to insulate and heat, and to take care of families. And so it is an awful situation where most significant structures, bar, say, some hospitals and schools built to standard, are deeply compromised and not safe for the ongoing aftershocks.
can you paint a picture for those listening, and even for us in the studio as well, about talking about they're being displaced in the town square? How would you see them surviving in those groups, and what's their method of survival?
I mean, and I think that's where our mind is going now, because for the last 3 days, and it continues, is search and rescue, getting people out, live people out from under the rubble. But now it will begin to turn now, and they need to keep doing that, by the way. The last person pulled out, and you're not going to believe this, the last person pulled out from under the rubble in Haiti was at day 27. And by the way, when they asked him how he survived, and to the Rema listener, or to your listeners in particular, he said, a man in a coat brought me water. So I sort of leave that one there. There's no question God sustained his life under that rubble. Now, he may have had access to a water source, but if you believe in miracles, you believe God sustained him. So my answer to that is you keep digging as long as you can hear a sound, or a dog can get a trace of a human being. or you've got some heat sensors through that rock, and these are the modern techniques for finding people under rubble. You keep digging. But then the attention comes to those tens of thousands, in this case millions, living outside of those structures. And so aid is beginning to get through, but the first UN convoy to leave the Turkey border and into Syria only left last night. So that's the first outside aid into the worst affected areas of Syria. So it has a long way to go to provide any sort of significant humanitarian assistance. So we have a partner, Baptist partner in Lebanon. They work in partnership in Syria and Aleppo with an evangelical church network up there. They're very, very close to those affected in Syria. And so they are mobilising and responding at present. And there'll be other groups like us as well.
You know, the death toll, you hear different numbers, but it must obviously be a lot higher than currently what it's at, right? How high are they sort of predicting it could potentially be?
Yeah, well, certainly the World Health Organization a couple of days ago said that number could climb by a factor of 8. Now, at that point, the number was more like sort of 6 to 8,000. So, but I think the principle they're stating there, and I've seen this before, and I started this disaster response work in that Indian Ocean tsunami, and then a few years later, it was in Haiti with that earthquake. I think in both those situations, you saw quite static death numbers for a while because the entire government and humanitarian responses is focused on taking care of the living. At some point, you start counting the dead. So the dead that are being counted are probably coming through the hospitals and through the morgues. So they're being officially signed off, for example, in Turkey. And I haven't looked extensively into this, but at some point you have to assume that if people are missing, say at day 10 or 2 weeks, you have to put them on the death register. And I think we'll see an enormous spike in numbers then because it will account for all those people they have not been able to get to under those rubbleized buildings.
We know that the picture is grim, but that's the real picture. But you're momentarily buoyed by images of people pulling out young children. There was a story about a baby who they have now named a miracle, newborn baby. So there are other stories like that.
Well, I think that baby story, just for a moment, is really quite incredible. It was attached to its mother, and its mother had perished, and it was still attached by the umbilical cord. Look, my wife's in medicine and has helped deliver babies, and I think if that baby had stayed attached to that mother, it actually would have died from the toxins in her system ultimately. So it is really quite an unbelievable story. And what's its journey going forward? It's going to need relatives to really care for it. What sort of trauma in life does that create for a baby? But I think I'm seeing images out of Syria, those guys in white helmets, who've been operating for a long time there, pulling people out during wartime, have turned their attention to pulling people out now in the earthquake. And you see these video shots and just the cheers that go up and the celebrations when a single life is pulled out from those. It really is quite moving, and you realise that those rescuers are just on the edge of their emotions the entire time, just looking for one more life that they can bring out.
When I see the pictures online and stuff, and you see these piles of rubble, to me it just takes me back to Christchurch, some of the pictures from there, and then even the World Trade Center. It's the same anywhere that this happens in the world. A pile of rubble looks like a pile of rubble, and it's got human beings in it. And it is pretty. There's something good about seeing countries that have their disagreements or even conflicts between each other, putting all of that aside, and they send their own emergency teams in to help automatically. And it's it's somehow, even though we fight around the world and all this kind of stuff, people still know that their enemy is still worthwhile, which is, I don't know, there's something hopeful.
I wish there was more of that. There was something touching about Israel offering up assistance. I mean, firstly to Turkey, you expect that, but actually offering it to Syria. Syria is an arch enemy of Israel. But to put that aside for a moment and offer that support, and I hope Syria take it up, because boy, could we do with more of that in the Middle East. And putting those tensions aside, to go back again to that Indian Ocean tsunami, there was rebel groups in Indonesia who laid their arms down and reconciled with the government. I was in Sri Lanka when that tsunami hit and responded. They had a group, the Tamil Tigers. They parked their guns for a while, but it didn't last long, and the fighting came back. And I fear that in that northwest corner of Syria, this will not resolve the issues, but the longer those parties can work together, the more chance they have of seeing their common humanity in a crisis like this.
Speaking about humanity, we're so far removed here in New Zealand, but hearing those stories, there are lots of Life FM listeners including ourselves who want to do something, be able to help out. What practical things can we do as Kiwis to help out?
Well, we might feel a long way away, but we have a partner, the Baptist Church in Lebanon, with an extensive reach into Syria, because they have, of course, had Syrian refugees in Lebanon for the last 11 years now. So some of those refugees have gone home and resettled into Syria, and the Evangelical Church Alliance, as it is, in Syria has been taking care of them and helping resettle them. So 48 hours ago, they mobilised and have decided they can take care of about 4,500 families with their initial funds and their initial activities, and they'll be providing a basket of food, basic foods for a family for a month. They'll be providing blankets, and they're calling them hoodies. Okay, we've got hoodies and jackets, but I know, this is warm clothing for winter conditions, and then basic sanitary items and a kitchen set. And this is about helping families operate in their displacement facility. So that's a good and normal package of goods to help people, and it's very basic stuff. What will come next is helping to repair housing, livelihoods, temporary schooling for children, child protection issues. So I can see how the program will unfold from here. And so all of that stuff is going to be necessary. But right now it is that life-saving package of food and warm clothing and blankets that if folks wanted to support, they can do so through Tearfund or other Christian charities that they know are operating in the area.
Because it comes to money, right? In the end, is the quickest thing that you can give that is going to make an immediate difference, just for them to be able to purchase and transport and logistics and all that kind of stuff, right?
We get it there straight away. We're already providing an update to our partners in Lebanon as to exactly how much funds we believe we can deliver to them, and other Tearfunds around are doing the same, and they've prioritised $1 million response there. We've raised 120,000 so far in New Zealand off our supporters, and so we move incredibly quickly. It was hours after the quake that we stood up our appeal and our response, and our partner said we will respond from Aleppo to this. So if folks do donate to this, it will go straight into those emergency needs.
That's heartwarming to know that Kiwis, they respond as a community. If you want to jump into tearfund.org.nz, you can donate directly there. Ian, we appreciate you coming in again. We wish it was under different circumstances, but you and your team are doing a fantastic job.